The IFP opposes the Expropriation Act.
The dismantling of US aid and sudden cessation of PEPFAR funding by the current US administration has been a huge shock and extremely damaging to our healthcare system.
I was a bit concerned, Mr. Malema, with all due respect, when your speech was not so much a concern about the people affected by the halting of this aid, but I think it was to a very large extent a strong attack on the United States.
In the past 21 years, nearly $110 billion has been spent through PEPFAR in more than 60 countries, with $8 billion or 145 billion rands being spent in South Africa alone.
At the moment, the trade between South Africa and the United States is an amount in totality of $21 billion per year.
The current Expropriation Act is flawed.
And it's not true that the AGOA thing is in the favor of big companies, etc. If AGOA goes wrong, it is ordinary workers in the agricultural sector, in the automobiles sector. It will be ordinary workers that will lose their jobs.
Section 25 of the Constitution already allows for land expropriation when necessary, but it must be done with compensation to ensure...
Guys, so like I said, guys, it got really heated yesterday at the parliament when the different parties that make up both the GNU and outside of the GNU came together to debate on how South Africa could begin its response to Donald Trump's position, Donald Trump's angle at which the US is actually seeing South Africa now in Donald Trump's presidency, his regime and his administration, which is actually not a good place. So these really three powerful speeches, first of all by DA's Carl William Dupré Luru, actually stating about his experiences as an intern on, the experiences he had, informing HIV positive patients in South Africa that they had HIV patients, they were HIV positive, the fear on their face, and how they actually ended up losing their lives in the process, probably part of the fear and all that. And now losing PEPFAR might compound to that, and that is actually reminding South Africans that the loss of PEPFAR is a huge damage, all right, to the economy of South Africa. Even though if you listen to Dr. Aaron Moswaledi's speech on this same debate, I have it on my Pan-Africanism channel, he actually argues that PEPFAR actually only supported 17%. Actually, this is a rhetoric that actually had been going for a long time, but that the rest of the if you take 17% out of 100, we have 83. That the rest of the 83% that was actually being used to take care of HIV positive patients in South Africa was being paid by South Africa. That's actually from Dr. Aaron Moswaledi, who is Minister of Health in South Africa. So let's quickly listen to these three powerful speeches by the DA MP. His name is MP Luru, Honorable Moulder from Freedom Plus, and this Freedom Front Plus, and this IFP, IFP MP here, Lengwa Nkuleko, in their rebuttals of the pros and cons of being in a fair relationship with the United States amidst this really sour, bitter state in South Africa's relationship with with the United States and Donald Trump. And
we'll now proceed, Honorable Luru.
Honorable Deputy Speaker and honorable members, let me paint you a picture. It is the year 2000, and I am a newly minted intern working at Victoria Hospital here in Cape Town. I am on call, and I admit a young 20-year-old woman who is extremely short of breath with an unusual X-ray that shows the ground glass appearance of pneumocystis pneumonia, and my heart sinks. I draw blood for HIV, but I already know what the result is going to be. Sure enough, at the end of my 30-hour shift, when I check the result, it is positive. And with a heavy heart and bleary eyes, I walk up to the ward to inform her of the diagnosis. And as I tell her that she's HIV positive, I see the fear in her eyes and the hope drain out of her body. I know that there's nothing I can do for her. But I still am shocked the next morning when I arrive in the ward and find that she has passed during the night. Experiences like these became commonplace for doctors and nurses in the late 1990s and the early 2000s in South Africa as the HIV epidemic broke on our shores and filled hospital wards with thousands of desperately ill children, men and women in the prime of their lives. The stigma and fear was palpable in communities. Misinformation was rife, and healthcare workers desperate and burnt out. As we were trying to cope with the tsunami...
Honourable Luru, please take your seat. Honourable Manyi, what point are you rising on?
Just to check if the Speaker will take a question on who brought AIDS here.
Honourable Luru, would you take a question? No, he will not take a question. Thank you very much. Could I also ask the members to my right, please, to converse. Honourable Deputy Minister of Basic Education, I really request you not to disrupt the Speaker. Thank you very much. Honourable Luru, please proceed.
As we were trying to cope with tsunami, we were hearing about breakthroughs in HIV treatment with a very expensive regimen combining 3 drugs called HART, or highly active antiretroviral therapy, showing remarkable results in America and Europe. But the idea that we might have HART available for patients in the government in South Africa seemed but a distant dream. Then, in 2003, President George Bush signed the US President's Emergency Plan for Aid Relief, known as PEPFAR, and everything started changing for the better. South Africa launched its ARV program with PEPFAR support in 2004, and although the program was significantly constrained until the interventions of Ministers Hogan and Motsoaledi from 2008 onwards, the psychological impact for people living with HIV and for healthcare workers was dramatic, with hope replacing the despair that we all felt. In the past 21 years, nearly $110 billion has been spent through PEPFAR in more than 60 countries, with $8 billion or 145 billion rands being spent in South Africa alone. Worldwide, an estimated 25 million lives were saved, and mother-to-child transmission of HIV was nearly completely wiped out, preventing 7.8 million infections in small babies. In South Africa, we need to recognize and acknowledge, as South Africans, we need to recognize and acknowledge the extraordinary generosity of the American people to us and to the rest of Africa through PEPFAR. The aid delivered has been extremely well spent through government programs and efficient NGOs. PEPFAR is arguably the most effective foreign aid program ever, perhaps only matched by the Marshall Plan that helped rebuild Europe after the Second World War. As is summarized on the Desmond Tutu Health Foundation website, PEPFAR, implemented in 2003, was a brilliant, generous and greatly valued intervention that changed the potential course of history forever. Under PEPFAR, we have seen a miraculous change to the narrative surrounding the AIDS response in Africa. Sadly, today, I am for all intents and purposes, delivering a eulogy for PEPFAR. The dismantling of US aid and sudden cessation of PEPFAR funding by the current US administration has been a huge shock and extremely damaging to our healthcare system. The DA would like to express its deep sympathy with patients who have lost access to PEPFAR-funded care, and also with the nearly 15,000 healthcare workers who have lost their jobs. We are also extremely concerned about the impact on other countries in Africa, many who rely on PEPFAR for nearly 90% of their HIV budgets, and for whom the recent decisions by the United States administration will cause even more severe consequences, causing increased mortality, morbidity, and instability. We believe that the abrupt manner in which the funding was stopped was unethical and wasteful, and it has not allowed governments, including our own, to make contingency plans and to allocate budget to cover funding shortfalls. It has, however, taught us as South Africans that in this post-COVID era, we will need to become more self-reliant, and that we desperately need to grow our economy and create jobs to get more revenue into the fiscus to be able to fund life-saving healthcare programs. The DA commends the National Department of Health for the guidance delivered a few weeks ago, instructing health facilities to provide 6 months of treatment to all stable ARV patients and to accommodate and help all patients who previously relied on PEPFAR-funded programs. But recognize that this will be a major challenge without extra staffing and extra funding. We would therefore like to urge the Department of Health to perform an immediate and careful spending review so that wasteful and unnecessary expenditure in the department is identified and it can be shifted towards programs which have previously been funded by PEPFAR. In conclusion, we continue to hope that the new US administration will reconsider recent decisions and that the American people will extend their generosity through PEPFAR for the next year or two so that South Africa and the rest of Africa can mitigate the impact of these funding cuts. Otherwise, medical interns will once again be faced with heartbreaking moments like the one I experienced 25 years ago. I thank you.
The likes of Honorable Moulder actually argued, he's actually debunking some of the facts. You know, there's one big argument out there that I've been hearing a lot, that, you know, the whole thing with cutting AGOA, right, would actually also sort of like affect those Afrikaners, or probably those guys, the farmers in South Africa who probably might not be black or colored, or I don't know. But anyway, that cutting AGOA would affect those who are actually fighting for the rights, for minority rights in South Africa. So in other words, in parentheses, this is actually, I think, we suspect that it's a referral to the Afrikaners and probably AfriForum and Solidarity and the representative who actually made a trip to the US to actually lay their complaints in terms of, you know, the farm mothers and all of that, all of the oppression they think they are going through in South Africa with the Bella Act, you know, coming NHI probably, and what was that, the Expropriation Act, all right? So there's been this argument roving around that even if at all AGOA goes, they are the ones who will be affected, because it's most of the crops that they produce, or most of produce they produce from their farming activities or probably production activities, that end up being, you know, exported to the US markets tariff free, all right? But anyway, Honorable Moulder is actually debunking that claim, arguing that if AGOA goes, right, it would benefit normal average people who actually have jobs, all right, in the car industry, manufacturing industry and all that, and not just these guys who probably are claimed to be beneficiaries of AGOA in quote. He also, Honorable Moulder also argues and is explaining on why the fact that, you know, Donald Trump's administration isn't just Donald Trump waking up to choose enmity with South Africa, right? He argues that even in Joe Biden's administration, South Africa actually came to the limelight because of its friendship with the people or some nations that America considers as really critical and probably enemies, so to speak, to the administration, right? So for South Africa to be choosing to align with those members, naturally, it would always fall in the negative or red book of the U.S. foreign policy. So Honorable Moulder is actually explaining that that's actually is a reason why probably America is deepening its criticisms on South Africa, not necessarily because of the awakening of or coming to emergence of Donald Trump. And then he's actually arguing that probably South Africa might need to learn from Indian Prime Minister Modi, who, despite the fact that India is in BRICS, he's actually mending his relationship with the US. They've actually signed some deals, defense deals and all that. And we could see that he had a visit to President Trump after the inauguration of President Trump as a US president going forward. And South Africa, he's actually arguing that South Africa doesn't necessarily have to sour its relationship with the US, but it can actually also be in BRICS and also be in good standing with the US, because it trades to the tune of $21 billion yearly with the US, all right, coupled with PEPFAR, which is now gone, and then AGOA. So that whole thing isn't something that should actually be lost at a whim, all right? And so that was actually Honorable Moulder. And finally,
Next speaker is the Honorable Moulder.
Honorable Deputy Speaker, the discussion we have today was brought to the House by the Honorable Mr. Malema, and it deals with the decision by the US government to halt aid to South Africa and our response thereto. And I wanted to thank Mr. Malema for bringing this topic to the House, because I think it's a very important subject that we need to discuss. I was a bit concerned, Mr. Malema, with all due respect, when your speech was not so much a concern about the people affected by the halting of this aid, but I think it was to a very large extent a strong attack on the United States, and that obviously is your right to do so. Now, since PEPFAR was created in 2023, the United States has spent more than $8 billion, my apology, on this project in South Africa, which made a huge difference to many, many people. As a matter of fact, for this current financial year, 2025, an amount of $439 million were budgeted, but that is now being suspended. My concern is there's a much bigger threat in terms of what's happening at the moment. PEPFAR is part of that, but it's a small part of that. The United States is the second largest trading partner of South Africa. It plays a very important and a very pivotal role in our economy in that sense. And at the moment, we do have the situation where the relationships between South Africa and the United States is not in a good place. And I know that the Honorable Minister of International Relations is going to participate later. But at the moment, the trade between South Africa and the United States is an amount in totality of $21 billion per year. It's a huge amount, our second largest trading partner. Of that amount of money, the AGOA agreement accounts for 3.6 billion rand. And it's not true that the AGOA thing is in the favor of big companies, etc. If AGOA goes wrong, it is ordinary workers in the agricultural sector, in the automobiles sector. It will be ordinary workers that will lose their jobs. We cannot and we should not have that kind of situation. The problem is that our relationship with the United States is not in a good place at the moment. And it's not true that it suddenly changed now that Mr. Trump became the President of the United States. That's not correct. Under the Biden administration already, there was an agreement, a bipartisan agreement, to have the total relationship between South Africa and the United States revalued. A bill was passed in the Congress in July of last year to do exactly that and to look at our relationship with the United States. And it was passed a bipartisan bill with both Democrats and Republicans. The problem is this. The United States identified from their perspective that Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea are their biggest threat to the United States' national security. And we must take note of that. When we continue to be a problem in that regard and try to create an impression that we want to be friends with all the people that the United States believe to be not on their side in terms of policy, in terms of national interest, we are creating our own problems. Maybe we should learn and take a lesson from Mr. Modi from India. India is a senior player in the BRICS alliance, senior partner there. But Mr. Modi visited the United States recently after Mr. Trump's election. He signed a very important trade agreement with the United States that also includes the delivery of weapons, etc., for the economy of India. What did he do? Mr. Modi did put India first. And my appeal would be to the Minister of International Relations, let's put South Africa first. Let's do what's in the best interest of our own country, our own citizens, and act in that manner. We don't have to choose sides for this and against that. Thank you very much.
And finally, in this video, and a really interesting set of speeches, I really admonish you guys to listen to the end of all speeches because it helps us understand where South Africa is at the moment and what likely South Africa will be facing in the near future going forward. So there was this guy from IFP. I usually listen to Chabisa a lot when I listen to IFP, but his name is Hlengwa Nkuleko. I think it's a really interesting speech anyway. He speaks about how South Africa needs now to really stand up and depend on self-reliance. Self-reliance should be the way forward for South Africa. He actually argues that IFP rejects the Expropriation Act, not because he just wants to reject it because of rejection's sake, but because of how it was passed. He actually argues that it was passed in a little bit of a reckless way, and that he wants expropriation with compensation, so that not like expropriation without compensation in its entirety, but if I listen to him correctly, he argues for a kind of expropriation that will bring a positive feedback to the nation and not one that would damage further or destroy further the economy. So let's
The Honourable the Deputy Minister of Transport.
Thank you very much, Honourable Deputy Speaker. The global political landscape is shifting rapidly and sovereign nations are making decisions that have far-reaching consequences. The United States, in exercising its own sovereign right, has halted aid funding to South Africa. In equal measure, South Africa must exercise its own sovereignty in responding to this decision in a manner that prioritizes our national interest, protects the most vulnerable, and safeguards our economic and social stability. Beyond that direct health implications, 15,000 healthcare workers are now at risk of losing their jobs at a time when South Africa faces record high unemployment. This is an undesirable development. The strain on the healthcare system will be severe, reducing access to treatment for vulnerable citizens, increasing workloads for remaining healthcare workers, and potentially leading to burnout and compromised care quality. In response, the IFP believes in short-term interventions and long-term solutions to mitigate the damage and build resilience. In the short term, for long-term gain, collaboration between the government, private sector, and NGOs will be essential for providing emergency funding, redirecting resources, and offering alternative employment opportunities in the healthcare sector. By doing so, we can soften the immediate impact of the funding cut while working toward long-term sustainability. In the long term, South Africa must move towards self-help and self-reliance and economic independence. Over-reliance on external aid makes us vulnerable to political global shifts, propaganda, and misinformation. The IFP firmly believes that cultivating the capacity to thrive independently is the only sustainable path forward. However, we further recognize that South Africa is not an island. Our economy and geopolitical standing are deeply tied to global trade. The United States remains a key strategic trade partner, and we must approach this situation with diplomacy and pragmatism. The IFP supports engagements on a well-reasoned diplomatic approach, which is necessary to preserve our economic relationship. However, Honorable Deputy Speaker, after all this is said and done, the hard truths here at home must be confronted. The crisis that is occurring is not in isolation. It exposes the deeper systemic failures in the country. The illusion of reconciliation in 1994 allowed injustices to persist without full accountability. The Codesa principle of sufficient consensus enabled oppressors to escape responsibility, while the Rainbow Nation facade only served to delay true economic justice. Today, emboldened elements of the past are once again challenging the progress that we have made. Let us be clear, some of those who benefited from apartheid never stopped working against a truly free South Africa. Their stance remains an anti-democratic South Africa. The irony is that they cry foul when we speak redress and transformation, terming it as racism, with their only recourse being a nostalgic longing to take us back to a racist past of black oppression. The return of the Trump administration has emboldened these forces, allowing them to undermine our democracy and economic stability under the guise of foreign policy decisions. AfriForum and Solidarity have erred in their modus operandi. Their recourse cannot be railing one government over another. Their pursuit for recourse could have found expression in other legitimate international fora. One area where sovereignty and national interest must be exercised is land reform. However, this must be done responsibly. The IFP opposes the Expropriation Act, but not because we reject land reform, but because we reject reckless policy making. Section 25 of the Constitution already allows for land expropriation when necessary, but it must be done with compensation to ensure economic stability. The current Expropriation Act is flawed and risks driving South Africa into further economic hardship. We support transformation, but not destruction. The US decision to halt aid is both currently now for South Africa a challenge and an opportunity. It forces us to rethink our economic policies and stand our own feet. We must at this moment put South Africa first. In conclusion, Honorable Deputy Speaker, it is only the MK party that congratulated Mr. Trump on his re-election. The chickens have come home to roost.